My stepmother tried to claim control over the house my mom left me. I refused to give in, and in retaliation, she forced me out on New Year's Eve. My name is Ryan, and I'm 25 years old. 2 years ago, my mom passed away unexpectedly, leaving a huge void in my life and the house I now live in. To her, this wasn't just any house, it was the house, her sanctuary, filled with memories of her love and warmth. Every room seemed to echo her presence, and losing her was one of the hardest things I've ever endured. But knowing she had left the house to me provided a small measure of comfort. Before her passing, my mom had made it clear the house was meant to be mine. My dad, Mark, supported this decision at the time, as she wanted me to have a stable place to call home, somewhere I could build my future. For 2 years, that house was my refuge, a peaceful space where I could feel connected to her. But a few months ago, everything changed when my dad announced he was remarrying. He had met Linda, a woman in her late 30s, at a local event here in Portland, where we live. Things moved quickly, and they were married in less than a year. I barely knew Linda before she moved in, but something about her felt wrong from the beginning. She didn't come alone. She brought her two kids, Alex, 17, and Mia, 15. Their move into the house wasn't gradual or considerate. They started bringing in their belongings, and before I knew it, they had made themselves at home. My dad presented it as a family decision, but I was never consulted. It wasn't his decision to make anyway. The house legally and emotionally belonged to me. Initially, I tried to keep an open mind, thinking I could give this new arrangement a chance, even if it wasn't what I wanted. But within weeks, Linda began acting as though the house was hers. She wasted no time rearranging furniture, adding her own decorations, and discarding items she deemed unnecessary. It started small. She replaced some of my mom's framed photos in the living room with cheap, generic prints of flowers and sunsets. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and said, "Oh, I thought it was time to refresh the place." "Don't you think it's a little outdated?" No, I didn't think so. Those photos weren't just decorations, they were cherished memories. But I let it go, thinking it wasn't worth fighting over. That was my mistake. A couple of weeks later, I noticed my mom's antique jewelry box was missing from the shelf in the dining room. This box was one of her most treasured possessions, something she always displayed with pride. When I asked Linda if she had seen it, she shrugged again and said, "I probably put it in storage. It's just clutter, and we need to make room for everyone." Clutter. That's what she called my mom's belongings. Things only got worse from there. Alex and Mia weren't outright terrible, but they showed no respect for the house. They treated it like a playground, leaving their stuff everywhere, eating in the living room and scattering crumbs on the furniture. One day, I caught Alex taking my laptop into his room without asking. When I confronted him, he acted like I was overreacting. Linda's response? "Teenagers will be teenagers, Ryan. You need to relax. I couldn't believe it." The breaking point came one night at dinner. Linda casually suggested that my bedroom would make a great study space for Alex and Mia. "It's bigger than the guest room," she said with a smile, as if she were doing me a favor. "You could move into the smaller one. You don't really need all that space." I stared at her in disbelief. "No," I said firmly. "That's not happening." Her smile faded. "Ryan, it's just a room. Don't be so selfish." My dad chimed in, trying to smooth things over. "Ryan, maybe you could compromise. We're a family now, and families share." But this wasn't about sharing. This was my house. My name was on the deed, not his, not Linda's, and certainly not Alex or Mia's. My mom had explicitly stated the house was mine, and my dad had agreed at the time. Now it seemed he had conveniently forgotten. After that dinner, I started locking my bedroom door whenever I left the house. I didn't trust any of them to respect my space. Sure enough, one afternoon, I caught Alex trying to open the door when he thought I wasn't home. His excuse? He needed a charger. I wasn't buying it. I vented to my friends about everything, and they were unanimously on my side. "This is your house," one of them said. "You don't owe them anything. If they can't respect your boundaries, kick them out." Another suggested changing the locks, and I seriously began considering it. But the situation kept escalating. Linda started spreading stories to extended family, claiming I was being ungrateful and refusing to share the family home. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years began texting me, asking why I couldn't be more accommodating. They clearly didn't know my side of the story, and I didn't have the energy to explain it to everyone. One evening, Linda ambushed me in the kitchen with what she called a solution. She proposed that I either move out entirely or agree to give her equal say in decisions about the house. She presented it like she was doing me a favor, but her audacity left me speechless. That's not happening, I told her bluntly. This is my house. She stormed off, and I overheard her complaining to my dad that I was ruining the family dynamic. He didn't say much, but it was clear he wasn't on my side. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had spiraled so badly. This house was supposed to be my sanctuary, my safe space. Now it felt like a war zone. I knew I had to prepare for a fight. This was my mom's house, her legacy, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. The situation didn't just deteriorate, it imploded. After the kitchen argument where Linda demanded equal say, the tension in the house became unbearable. Every interaction with her felt like navigating a minefield, and Alex and Mia's behavior only made things worse. They grew even more entitled, leaving messes everywhere, and treating the house like a hotel where they had no responsibilities. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Alex sprawled on the couch, eating chips and scrolling through his phone. Crumbs were scattered all over the couch, the floor, and the coffee table. Meanwhile, Mia had taken over the dining table, not with schoolwork, but with nail polish and her phone blaring a video. Seriously? I asked, gesturing to the mess. Alex barely looked up. What's the big deal? I'll clean it later. You said that yesterday, I snapped. Linda, overhearing from the kitchen, chimed in. Ryan, why are you always on their case? They're teenagers. Let them enjoy themselves. Let them enjoy themselves? This is my house, Linda, I reminded her. She turned to me with that smug smile she'd perfected. It's our home now too, Ryan. You need to get used to that. Talking to her felt like banging my head against a brick wall. No matter how much I tried to set boundaries, they were ignored, dismissed, or twisted to make me seem unreasonable. But none of that compared to what happened on New Year's Eve. I had planned a quiet night at home. I wasn't in the mood for celebrating. All I wanted was to reflect on the year, think about what lay ahead, and enjoy some quiet time in my own home. Instead, Linda decided to throw a party, without even telling me. I only found out when I got back from picking up takeout. Walking through the front door, I was greeted by a house full of strangers. The music was blaring in the living room, and the home my mom had cherished was in chaos, covered in drinks, snacks, and unfamiliar faces laughing as if they owned the place. I found Linda in the kitchen, pouring wine for a group of her friends. What the hell is this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She gave me an exaggerated look of disbelief, as though I was being ridiculous. Oh, Ryan, don't be such a killjoy. It's New Year's Eve, lighten up, she said dismissively. You didn't even bother asking if this was okay, I snapped. This is my house. Linda rolled her eyes and set the wine bottle down with a loud clink. We live here too, Ryan. Stop acting like you're the only one who matters. I turned to my dad, who was chatting with someone in the corner. Dad, are you seriously okay with this? He looked uncomfortable but shrugged. It's just one night, son. Let it go. Let it go? I felt like I was losing my mind. This wasn't just about a party. It was about the total lack of respect for my boundaries and my home. I stormed upstairs and slammed the door behind me. But even in my room, I couldn't escape it. The muffled sounds of the party reminded me of how powerless I felt in a place that was supposed to be my refuge. At midnight, the fireworks outside were drowned out by the cheering and shouting downstairs. I tried to block it out, but then there was a knock at my door. Before I could answer, Linda let herself in, a smug expression plastered across her face. You know, Ryan, I think it's time you take a break from the house, she said, crossing her arms. What are you talking about? I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. You've been so uptight lately. It's obvious this arrangement isn't working for you, she replied. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while. Give yourself some space to cool off. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you seriously kicking me out of my own house? I wouldn't put it like that, she said, her calm tone infuriating. I'm just saying it would be better for everyone if you took a step back. Alex and Mia need a stable environment, and you're not exactly helping with that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, I said firmly, this is my house and I'm not going anywhere. Linda didn't back down. She crossed her arms tighter and narrowed her eyes. Fine. If that's how you want it, don't expect us to keep tiptoeing around you. The party wound down around 2 a.m., and by then I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to keep playing this game. Linda and my dad had pushed me too far, and I was done letting them trample all over my life. The next morning, I contacted both a locksmith and a lawyer. I was through with being polite. If Linda and her kids thought they could steamroll me, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Starting the new year on such a sour note was painful, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was taking back control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. After that disastrous New Year's Eve, I knew things were about to come to a head. Linda wasn't just crossing boundaries anymore, she was stomping all over them. Her suggestion that I leave the house lit a fire in me. If she thought she could push me out of the home my mom had left me, she had another thing coming. The first step I took was calling my lawyer. I needed to ensure that all my paperwork, the deed, the will, and every other document was in order. Sitting in my lawyer's office that afternoon, I finally felt some clarity. He assured me that my legal ownership of the house was indisputable. No one, not even Linda, could take it away from me. That reassurance didn't make dealing with her any easier. The day after the party, I came home from work to find Linda and my dad sitting at the dining table. Linda had her usual smug expression, and I could immediately tell they had something planned. Ryan, she began in a syrupy tone, we need to talk. Here we go, I thought. She launched into a rehearsed speech about how things weren't working, how my unwillingness to compromise was disrupting the family dynamic, and how Alex and Mia felt unwelcome in the house. So we've come up with a solution, she said, leaning back as if she were presenting a brilliant idea. I'm not interested in your solution, I cut her off, crossing my arms. Linda's smile faltered briefly, but she quickly recovered. You haven't even heard it yet. We think it would be best if you moved out for a few months. Just temporarily, to give everyone time to adjust. My dad, sitting silently beside her, nodded weakly. I couldn't believe it. This is my house, I said, my voice rising. I'm not going anywhere. If anyone needs time to adjust, maybe you should be the ones to leave. Linda's face hardened. Ryan, don't be ridiculous. We're a family now. Families make sacrifices for each other? No, I shot back. Families respect one another. From the moment you moved in, you've shown nothing but disrespect for me, my mom's memory, and this house. The room fell silent. My dad stared at the table like a scolded child, avoiding my eyes. Linda stood abruptly, her tone icy. Well, if that's how you feel, don't expect us to keep putting up with your selfishness. She stormed out of the room, and my dad followed her, leaving me alone in a house that no longer felt like home. Things only escalated from there. A few days later, I came home to find my bedroom door wide open. Alex was sitting on my bed, casually using my gaming console. My stomach sank. What the hell are you doing in here? I yelled. Alex looked up, startled. Relax, man. I just wanted to play a game. Get out, I snapped, pointing to the door. Linda appeared in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. What's going on? She asked. He's in my room, using my stuff without permission, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Linda rolled her eyes. Oh, Ryan, it's not a big deal. Alex was just borrowing it. Borrowing. He didn't even ask. You need to stop making everything such a big issue, she said, her condescending tone pushing me over the edge. It's just a gaming console. Grow up. That was the last straw. The very next day, I bought a lock for my bedroom door. But Linda wasn't done testing boundaries. The following weekend, I returned home from running errands to discover my key no longer worked in the front door. I stood there in disbelief, jiggling the key in the lock to no avail. Finally, I knocked. After a while, Linda opened the door, feigning surprise. Oh, Ryan, I forgot to tell you. We changed the locks earlier today. Here's your new key, she said, handing me a single key with a tight-lipped smile. Why would you change the locks without telling me? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. It was just easier this way, she said dismissively. No big deal. No big deal. This is my house, and you locked me out without even a warning. I stepped inside, fists clenched. Where's Dad? He's in the kitchen, Linda said with a wave of her hand, completely unconcerned. Honestly, Ryan, I don't understand why you're making such a fuss. We're all just trying to live peacefully together. I found my dad at the kitchen table, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. Dad, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. Did you know about the locks? He looked up, startled. Yeah, Linda mentioned it. I didn't think it was a big deal. Didn't think it was a big deal? You locked me out of my own house. He shrugged helplessly. It's just a key, Ryan. Let's not blow this out of proportion. I couldn't even find the words to respond. I grabbed my things and left, crashing at a friend's place for the night. The next day, I made two crucial stops. First to a locksmith to schedule my own lock change, and then back to my lawyer's office to prepare for the inevitable. I was fully aware that Linda wouldn't stop until she got her way. But I wasn't going to give in and let her win. Meanwhile, Linda was busy crafting her own narrative. She told anyone who would listen, neighbors, extended relatives, maybe even the mailman for all I knew, that I was selfish and unwilling to share the family home. It didn't matter to her that the house was legally mine or that she had been part of the family for less than a year. One afternoon, I arrived home to find a neighbor standing on my porch with a casserole. She was clearly hesitant, but eventually said, I don't mean to intrude, but Linda's been saying some things about you. Is everything okay? I was furious. Not only was Linda trying to take over my house, but now she was tarnishing my reputation. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep playing nice. Linda had pushed me too far, and I wasn't about to let her walk all over me any longer. I thought things had already hit rock bottom, but I had underestimated Linda's nerve. After changing the locks on me and turning neighbors and family against me, she took things to the next level. One evening, I came home to find my dad, waiting for me in the living room. He looked more drained than usual, but there was something else in his expression, something that made me uneasy. What's going on? I asked, dropping my bag on the floor. We need to talk, he said, motioning for me to sit down. Linda appeared from the kitchen, arms folded, her face wearing a smug, self-satisfied look. I stayed standing. We've decided, my dad began cautiously, that we should look into refinancing the house to address some financial issues. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. What? This house isn't yours to refinance, it's mine. Linda jumped in, her tone sickeningly sweet. Ryan, we all live here. It's only fair that the house benefits the whole family. Fair? I snapped. This house was left to me by my mom. My name is on the deed. You can't just decide to refinance something that doesn't belong to you. Linda's calm mask cracked briefly. Don't be so selfish, Ryan. We're all struggling, and you're just sitting on an asset that could help everyone. My dad chimed in, Son, it wouldn't even be much, just enough to get us back on track. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The house wasn't just property. It was my home and my mom's legacy. And now they wanted to treat it like an ATM. No, I said firmly, it's not happening. Linda stormed out of the room, muttering about how impossible I was to deal with. My dad sat there, staring at the floor, avoiding my gaze. I felt a pang of disappointment, not just in him, but in the entire situation. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, consumed by the constant pressure Linda was putting on me. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. Sure enough, within days, Linda escalated the situation further. She filed a lawsuit against me, claiming my dad had verbally promised her partial ownership of the house when they got married. Her argument included a fabricated story about how she had contributed time and effort to improve the property, supposedly giving her a right to a share of it. It was absolute nonsense, but it was enough to drag me into court. My lawyer wasn't worried. The claim was flimsy, and Linda didn't have a shred of evidence to support it. Still, the idea of fighting a legal battle over something so absurd was both exhausting and infuriating. While the case was ongoing, Linda doubled down on portraying herself as the victim. She spread lies to our extended family, claiming I was trying to throw her and my dad out onto the street. She even went so far as to accuse me of being emotionally abusive, a baseless accusation that couldn't have been further from the truth. Messages from relatives started pouring in, filled with judgment and outrage. Ryan, how could you do this to your family? One text read. Another said, "Your mom would be so disappointed." That hit a nerve. My mom would have been horrified by Linda's behavior and my dad's lack of backbone. But trying to explain that to people who had already decided I was the villain felt like a waste of time. Linda didn't stop at sowing discord among family members. She took her campaign online. I found out when a neighbor sent me a screenshot of one of Linda's social media posts asking, "Is this about you?" In the post, Linda claimed she had sacrificed everything to be part of a blended family, only to be betrayed by an ungrateful stepson who refused to share. The comments were filled with strangers calling me selfish and heartless. It felt surreal. I had gone out of my way to accommodate Linda and her kids, yet now I was being vilified. My lawyer advised me to ignore the drama and focus on the case, but I couldn't let her lies go unanswered. We filed a countersuit for harassment and defamation, which seemed to shake her confidence. Around this time, an unexpected ally came forward. A family friend reached out after hearing about the situation, revealing they knew Linda from her previous marriage. They had evidence that Linda had used similar manipulative tactics in the past. The documents and messages they provided showed how Linda had drained her ex-husband's assets before abandoning him when things got tough. This turned out to be a game changer in court. My lawyer systematically dismantled Linda's arguments, presenting the deed, my mom's will, and financial records that clearly showed Linda hadn't contributed a penny to the house. During cross-examination, Linda faltered, struggling to explain the supposed improvements she had made to the property. Eventually, she admitted there weren't any. By the end of the hearing, her case had completely unraveled. The judge ruled in my favor, dismissing all of Linda's claims and ordering her to pay my legal fees. It was a decisive victory, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I'd hoped for. Linda stormed out of the courtroom, muttering about how unfair the system was. My dad, once again, looked like a man caught in the middle, torn between his loyalty to her and the reality of the situation. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the bare walls. The house felt emptier than ever, but it finally felt like mine again. Linda's legal games were over, but I knew this wasn't the end. She wasn't the type to back down quietly, and I braced myself for whatever she might try next. Winning in court should have marked the conclusion, but with Linda, nothing was ever straightforward. Even after losing the case, she refused to leave the house, claiming she had nowhere else to go and needed more time to figure things out. I wasn't buying it. This wasn't about logistics, it was about control. I gave her 2 weeks to move out, but when the deadline passed, I had no choice but to begin formal eviction proceedings. My lawyer helped me file the necessary paperwork, which gave her another 30 days to vacate. If she stayed beyond that, I'd be legally allowed to have her removed by the police. My dad wasn't happy about it. One evening, my dad cornered me in the kitchen, looking more desperate than I'd ever seen him. "Ryan, don't do this," he said, his voice shaky. "She just needs a little more time. She's under a lot of stress." "So am I, Dad," I replied firmly. "I've been patient. I've been more than fair, but enough is enough." "You're tearing this family apart," he said, shaking his head. "No, Dad, she is," I shot back. "She's been pushing my limit since day one, and you've let her. If you're so concerned about her, maybe you should find somewhere else for her to stay." He didn't respond, just sighed and walked away, leaving me filled with a confusing mix of guilt and frustration. Linda's reaction to the eviction notice was, as expected, over the top. Over the next few weeks, she created as much chaos as possible. She spread fresh lies to anyone who would listen, including the neighbors. One day, I overheard her telling the couple next door that I was throwing her out onto the street and that she had no way to support herself. The breaking point came one afternoon when I arrived home to find Linda holding a yard sale on the front lawn. She was selling items that didn't even belong to her, many of which had once been my mom's. I froze in shock when I saw it. Among the random items on display was a vintage lamp that my mom had loved. I confronted her immediately. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, pointing at the sale. She had the audacity to smile. "Oh, I thought this might help with expenses." "Don't worry, Ryan, I'm only selling the clutter." "That's not clutter," I shouted. "That's my mom's stuff." A neighbor must have noticed how furious I was because they stepped in, suggesting Linda shut the sale down before things got worse. I ended up calling the police to document the incident. Predictably, Linda tried to play the victim, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the officers weren't buying it. By this point, even my dad seemed fed up with her behavior. He started spending more time away from the house, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was beginning to question his decision to stay with Linda. Whether he actually planned to leave her or not no longer mattered to me. I was focused on reclaiming my home. When the final eviction day came, Linda didn't leave quietly. That morning, I was startled by a loud commotion outside. Looking out the window, I saw her dragging her belongings onto the lawn, yelling at anyone within earshot about how unfairly she'd been treated. A small group of neighbors had gathered, some recording the spectacle on their phones. I refused to give her the attention she wanted and stayed inside. By the afternoon, she was gone. My dad left with her, keeping his earlier promise to move out if I didn't compromise. It hurt to see him go, but I knew I had made the right choice. The days that followed were a bittersweet mix of relief and sadness. The house was finally mine again, but it felt tainted by all the drama and negativity Linda had brought into it. The rooms were cluttered with her leftover junk, and several of my mom's sentimental items were either damaged or missing. It took weeks of effort to clean up and reclaim the space, but I wasn't alone. Friends came over to help, and even a few neighbors who had witnessed Linda's antics offered their support. Little by little, the house began to feel like home again. I decided to repaint the living room in a color my mom had once mentioned wanting to use, but never got around to. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a meaningful step toward healing. I also started working on the garden, planting the flowers my mom had loved. Turning the chaos into something beautiful felt cathartic. During this time, I began therapy. The emotional toll of the past year had been heavier than I realized, and I needed help processing everything. My therapist guided me through the anger and resentment I felt, not just toward Linda, but toward my dad as well. Speaking of my dad, he eventually reached out asking if we could mend our relationship. He admitted he had made mistakes and said he regretted not standing up to Linda sooner. I told him I needed time. Trust wasn't something I could rebuild overnight, especially after everything that had happened. As for Linda, I cut her off entirely. I blocked her on every platform and made it clear that I didn't want to hear from her or about her ever again. She was no longer a part of my life, and I intended to keep it that way. A few weeks after she left, I received an unexpected message from her ex-husband. He had heard about the situation and wasn't surprised. Apparently, Linda had pulled similar stunts in the past, using manipulation and lies to get what she wanted. He even apologized on behalf of Alex and Mia, saying they had likely been caught up in her web of deceit. Surprisingly, Alex and Mia reached out to me as well. They apologized for their behavior and admitted they had been influenced by their mother's narrative. While it wasn't a heartfelt reunion, it provided a sense of closure. At least they were beginning to see the truth. With Linda and the legal battles finally behind me, I've shifted my focus to moving forward. The house is nearly fully renovated, and I'm planning a housewarming party to celebrate this new chapter. For the first time in what feels like ages, the house is a place of peace, a place where I can breathe, reflect, and begin again. This journey wasn't just about reclaiming the house. It was about reclaiming my boundaries, my life, and my sense of self. This is my home, and I won't let anyone take it away from me again.